So welcome everyone to our webinar, the 15-Minute Master. And we are really privileged to have Mary Fran Bontempo, an alumna of LaSalle, presenting this evening on a topic that is near and dear to her heart. And I'm going to let her tell that part of her story. I want to give you a little bit of background on Mary Fran. She is an award-winning two-time TEDx speaker, an author of several books, a humorist, and a podcast host. And she wants to help other people benefit from the things that she has learned from her own life about uncovering their brilliance and resilience and doing that 15 minutes at a time. So some of her books, The 15-Minute Master, the Women's Book of Words. Not what you think.
No, it's not.
But it's a great book. It's those things we tell ourselves that get in the way. Okay. And then she has a podcast called Brilliantly Resilient Live. So I encourage you to check out her website, maryfranbontempo.com. And Dave, we're hearing your pup there, so I'm going to go ahead and mute you. And with that, Mary Fran, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Deborah. I'm so delighted to be here. So I am Mary Fran Bontempo. I am a proud LaSalle explorer, 1981. Please don't do the math and try to figure out how old I am. Let's leave that alone. But I'm delighted to be here today to talk about the 15-Minute Master, which is not about time management. No one gets to tell me how to manage my time unless they walk a mile in my shoes, and so far I've had no takers. However, we are currently living during a period when time means different things to us than it did even a few short months ago. Now having too much time, as when our days can seem endless and repetitive, is one thing we're dealing with, or too little time, as when we see the cost to human life during this pandemic, time has taken on a greater significance to us and a different significance to us. But the concept of time has always been an important one, and that was particularly driven home to me in a very painful way on Mother's Day of 2010. While I was celebrating with my family at my mother's house, I had walked into another room when I heard a commotion coming from the family room where I had just left. And I rushed in to find my son, David, sitting on the couch, shaking uncontrollably. We called the paramedics, who repeatedly asked him what he had taken, which was not a question I was expecting them to ask. And he refused to answer until he got out of the house. It turns out, we found out when we got to the hospital, that David had taken a painkiller and he overdosed on that. It was a painkiller that he stole, and he ingested it because he couldn't get his hands on heroin that day. Mother's Day of 2010 was the day that I learned my son was a heroin addict. The doctors told us that unless they could reverse the effects of that medication, that my son would need a liver transplant if he lived. So time suddenly becomes very, very important when your child's life is on the line. So David survived, but that was only the beginning of our journey into what I call the 10th hell. And when friends learned what we were going through, they would say things like, very well-meaning things like, well, you're just going to have to take it one day at a time. And my husband and I would just look at each other and laugh. Well, obviously they never lived with an addict, because with an addict, things can change exponentially in moments. We could not take it one day at a time. We couldn't take it a half a day. We couldn't take it an hour at a time. We were down to 15 minutes. That we could do. And then as we progressed through the nightmare of addiction, we realized that this 15-minute mantra, where we were just taking life in 15-minute chunks, it had also evolved into a process or a type of a system that we were using to survive. And that is how the 15-Minute Master was born. beauty of it, which even I didn't realize at the beginning until we were through the worst of our son's active addiction, was that it became a process that not only worked during that crisis, but it worked beyond the crisis, and it worked for both professional and personal issues. And that was when I thought, I can turn this into something that could help other people. My husband and I still use that process today. So, what is the 15-minute master? The 15-minute master is 15 minutes, 3 questions leading to 1 action step to make things better. That 15 minutes was all that I could manage at the time when David was at his worst in active addiction. But what I found was that I could use this process at looking through that framework. That 15-minute framework helped me to break issues down into manageable chunks that I could then focus on with less emotional baggage. Emotion is one of the issues that we bring to crisis and to most things, because we are emotional creatures at heart, and logic therefore often comes second. I mean, think about it. When you're hit with a crisis, the first thing you feel is that powerful surge of emotion. I couldn't function on that level and help my son in any way and get through that. So by breaking things down into those 15-minute chunks, I could manage 15 minutes, 3 main questions, and 1 action step to make things better. Became a simple process that broke down any problem or even decision that I had to make into manageable framework, and it works. So, and please feel free to interject anything at any point during the chat where you want to talk about this or comment or ask a question, because I would like this to be an engaging conversation between us. So now let's talk about what better means. Okay, here's what better, let's start here. What better does not mean. Better does not mean fixed, solved, or perfect. If fixed, solved, or perfect were possible, you wouldn't be doing it in 15 minutes and you wouldn't be sitting down thinking about it. So we're not looking for fixed, solved, or perfect. I don't know anybody who can approach a problem of any consequence and solve it in any short period of time, let alone 15 minutes. But what we're looking for here is something that is more advantageous and effective. That's the goal. That's what we're aspiring to, something that moves us in the direction that we want to go. That's the desired outcome. However, we don't always get the desired outcome, so we may have to settle for not as bad. Sometimes that's the best we can do. When things are awful, sometimes you have to look at that 15-minute time period and say, what can I do within these next 15 minutes that will make this not as bad as it currently is? Sometimes better just means different. Sometimes it just has to be not the same thing to give yourself a break. But to me, the thing that better most often means is movement. It doesn't always have to be forward movement. It could be lateral movement. Sometimes it's backwards movement, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But, you know, life is like, to me, it's like a series of dance moves. We are sometimes moving forward, sometimes we're moving backwards, and sometimes we're just swaying from side to side. The key is some sort of movement to help make things better. So now, how do you react to crisis? Do you find yourself panicking? Do you approach things more logically and methodically? And how does crisis make you feel? Weigh in on the chat so we can get a little bit of a conversation going here. And the next question then is, do you handle work issues differently than family issues? I think most of us do, because there's a more emotional component attached to family issues. And I also think that most of us, when we react to crisis, because crisis is often like a train wreck or a sucker punch, the first thing you do is react with your gut. And it's painful and it's scary, but in order to make anything move forward, we have to learn how to limit that emotion, and breaking these things down, these issues, into smaller 15-minute chunks can help us do that. Do we have anybody who wants to weigh in on how you feel about crisis? Does it make you panic? Do you approach it methodically?
Yep, we're getting a couple answers here. So when somebody says panic in capital, someone crisis is the bad feeling in my stomach and cyclical thinking.
Oh my gosh, yes. That cyclical thinking where you get caught in that little hamster wheel that goes on in your head over and over, where you're replaying either the disaster scenario that you're just experiencing or what's going to happen next and how it's going to get worse. So yes, you absolutely have that cyclical thinking that happens in the midst of all this.
Yep, so we have somebody responding to the second question. I yell more in family issues because they're more personal.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that again, that emotional component, when we care about things with our heart as well as our head, our reactions are more intense, they're more extreme, and we worry more about the people that those issues are affecting. So of course our reaction is going to be more intense. It's a little easier to take a step back when we're just dealing with work issues or something that doesn't affect us on that personal level.
Yeah, so someone else says calmer in a work situation compared to home. Yeah.
Yeah, totally different.
We have a couple people approach it methodically, treat it like a project.
That's great. Anybody who can approach those kinds of crises like a project. I always find that for me personally, I have to figure out how to either shelve or at least tamp down the emotional component, at least at first, so that I can get into that place of logical thought. It takes me a little bit of time to do that. But hey, if you can go right into methodically and logically, then you're one step ahead of me and one step ahead of, I think, a lot of people. So congrats to you. That's not an easy place for, I think, most of us to at least start. The goal is to get there, but I don't think most of us start there.
Yeah, so we have one person says, first I freak out, then I calm down and try to break it down.
Yeah.
Says, first I feel it in my body, my muscles get tight, my stomach knots. If I can, after I settle my muscles, I can then move to settling my mind enough to tackle the issue.
I have often said that I lose my neck when I'm in the middle of that. My shoulders go up around my ears. And you know, that stress that we feel in our bodies, it's certainly a sign of, again, that emotional component that we kind of have to figure out what to do with that and how to manage that before we can move on and deal with any of this stuff logically and, in fact, productively. And that whole feeling being in
one
your
more. Someone says, I ask more questions to understand work issues. I've only started asking more questions in family issues. Sounds like they've started that more recently. So,
and you know, I think that happens too a lot with families because we assume, because we know people in our family so well, we assume that we know either what they're thinking, where they're coming from, where their place is in this. And we're going to talk about some of that later, about how we should or shouldn't react to those feelings. So I'm glad that whoever that was brought that point up. So thanks for that. Okay, so we're going to move on. So before we approach any kind of crisis, we have to figure out what we're bringing to the table. And this is about our mindset. So what is your firewall? People get stuck for all kinds of reasons, either like uncertainty or fear or procrastination, laziness, busyness, complacency, anything. And we all possess these personality traits and weird idiosyncrasies that can keep us from making progress, let alone solving problems. However, when we can look at what we're bringing to the table with an unflinching eye, it is easier to call ourselves on our own excuses. It's not fun, but if we can commit to saying, oh, yeah, I do that, then we can begin to lift the roadblocks to action. Now, I can call you all out on all of these personality quirks, except the millennials thing, because that doesn't apply to me, but pretty much everything else does. I possess most of them. My poor husband always says he can never get bored with me because he never knows which of my multiple personalities is going to surface at any given time. So let's take a look at some of these personality quirks, these firewalls that keep us from proceeding and in a positive direction with action. So the first one is a label that my children have lovingly attributed to me than old head. So I'm a person of, let's just say, a certain generation. Now, people in my generation, to us, 15 minutes is nothing. 15 minutes is half of a sitcom, which again probably indicates how old I am, because I don't think people call them sitcoms anymore. But it's half of a sitcom on television. It's nothing. The problem with people who are of that certain generation, with we old heads, is sometimes we think that 15 minutes is so little time that we can't accomplish anything of value. It's not enough time to accomplish anything of value. However, yes, that's correct. It's not enough time to solve a problem, but 15 minutes is enough time to start. Now, the next step is the millennials. The millennials they're juggling 2 or 3 jobs. They're hit with a constant barrage of information, constant distraction. They can do a million things in 15 minutes. However, one of the things that they have a problem doing because of all that distraction is intense focus on one thing. Solving problems effectively does not happen when you're multitasking. Multitasking is a myth, by the way. It's been proven by scientists that brains do not multitask. They switch from one activity to another. So you're never completely accomplishing any one thing when you're switching back and forth like that. So that's the issue that millennials have to deal with, focus. The procrastinator, that's self-explanatory. We all know what that means. And I can call myself on this because when I was supposed to be writing this chapter in the book, I was watching endless episodes of carpool karaoke. So I am a procrastinator. The procrastinator is constantly putting things off for one reason or another. Then we have the worrier, and I am guilty of that as well. The worrier is the person who creates problems through the what ifs and what might happen, and you end up getting paralyzed. You can't make a decision to move forward because of all the possible scenarios that you're creating in your head of what might happen. The next person is the control freak. Now, I wish I could see you all because I would ask you if we had any control freaks out there, and you should all be raising your hands because we all have a control freak in us. I actually saw a sign at a store one time and it said, "I'm not a control freak, but can I show you the right way to do that?" And my kids were like, "Oh my God, that's so you." And it is me. We all have a measure of control freak in us. Control freaks think that we can do things better than everybody else. We know what other people need. We know how to do it right. And if you just let us do everything, the world would be in much better shape. The control freak thinks they can manage everything, which they can. Then we have the scaredy cat. The scaredy cat's a lot like the worrier, but the scaredy cat can come to a decision. They just can't, bless you, they just can't implement it because they're afraid of what might happen. They're afraid they might make a mistake. And then finally, we have the busy bee who's too busy handling everybody's anything and everything. Even if it's not their stuff, they handle everybody else's stuff most of the time so that they don't have to handle their own. They use the excuse of busyness. They can't address longstanding issues because they're too busy doing things and they think it takes an investment of time that it doesn't have. So the question now is, what are your firewalls? What are those character traits, and we're not going to call them flaws, that can keep you from action? Deborah, are we going to do a poll here or no?
Yep, you should be able to click on poll.
Okay, so let's get the poll up. Here we go. Hold on one second. And let's see if we can get this going. Okay, so here we go. Which of these character traits can keep you from acting, solving problems, achieving what you want to achieve, and becoming who you want to be? And feel free to check multiple choice because, as I said, they all apply to me. So let's see who we get here. We've got procrastinators. Oh, we've got the old heads, the worriers, control freaks. Yes, 58%. Oh my goodness, 65% are control freaks. Here we go. We're going to give you a few more seconds here to keep going. 70% voted so far. Let's see, 24 out of 33. Anybody else want to weigh in? Okay. We've got a good spread of things here. I'm going to just give you a few more seconds before we end this poll. Okay, so we're going to take a look at this now. So the control freak wins. Yay, all you control freaks out there. And congratulations for admitting it. That's the, what do they say? That's the first sign to beginning to solve your problem, is admitting that you have it. So out of 29 people who chose to respond, 16 of you said that you were control freaks, 55%. Are you seeing the poll results? You should be seeing that now. So then we had 45% of the procrastinator. We have worriers, of course. We have those of us of that certain generation, the old heads. We have the busy bee who's very, very busy with everything. The scaredy cat comes in at 24%. And then we have millennials who have a lot of trouble focusing simply because they're overwhelmed. So the point to all of this is that we all bring things to the table. And once we can admit that and acknowledge that, then we can start to remove some of those obstacles to handle these issues. So here's what the 15-minute master process allows you to do in this. You can commit to a brief time frame that accomplishes one single goal, which is one action step. That's it. That addresses we old heads, it addresses the millennials, and it addresses the procrastinators. 15 minutes to one action step. You determine what is real based on facts to stop spinning scenarios in your head, which helps the worrier. You discover what is within your power, and what's within your rightful domain. And then where do you have the right, you little control freak, to exert your influence? Next, you execute a single step. If you're a scaredy cat, you're not going to be overcommitting. You're executing one single step, and that one thing is up to you, big or small. Similarly, determining and executing a single step does not require a huge time commitment, so the busy bees among you are out of excuses. It's a 15-minute time commitment. So now we're going to put on our grown-up panties and we're going to manage our stuff in a timely, effective way. So here we go. Let's get rid of the poll. And we are going to move on. I hope we're going to move on. Here we go. To the next step, the 15-minute master. Now, the 15-minute master is really a two-part process. The first and most important step is this: live within the next 15 minutes. Live within the next 15 minutes. When I was in crisis with my son, that was all I could manage. When most of us are in crisis, the fight or flight response kicks in. And as a rule, we all want to run away for the most part. That's what kicks in first. But generally, we stay and we fight. The problem is that we're reacting based on that emotion again. And that emotion, for the most part, is fear. We panic, we get overwhelmed, we even hold our breath. And I can tell you that when I was in the midst of the worst with my son, there were many nights where I would bolt awake, gasping, because I realized that I was holding my breath in my sleep. Often that idea, that fear that we're experiencing, is coming from projecting what might happen beyond the circumstances. Not that the circumstances are not scary, but if we can set our minds through just getting through the next 15 minutes, if you're in crisis, you just get through. And then you get through the next 15 minutes after that, and the next 15 minutes after that, and so on. If we can do that, we relieve our minds of having to find a solution to the crisis, and we just manage the present moment and whatever we can manage within that. Be only in the present moment and allow yourself to process in 15-minute chunks. That's the foundation of the 15-minute master, and that evolved during that time period of intense crisis when David was at his worst. We simply managed what we could in the next 15 minutes. As time went on and David moved further into recovery, the 15-minute master evolved into a system whereby we could then begin to plan for what was next And that was where we started to ask those 3 essential questions that led to that one action step to make things better, where we could then tackle these problems more systematically instead of like our hair was on fire, which was what we felt like most of the time. But the process still involved only 15 minutes. And now we're going to work the system. So before you work this system, you have to get your head and your physical environment set up in the right way. Find 15 undisturbed minutes. Undisturbed, meaning no YouTube, no Facebook, no phones, no anything. The door shut, the dog outside, the kids in another room. Undisturbed minutes. If you have to go into your closet to find them, do it. Whatever you need to do to find 15 undisturbed minutes. The next thing you need is quiet. Do you remember quiet? We used to have quiet. We used to know what that was. Now we are bombarded by a constantly never-ending influx of noise. Quiet. You need to learn to shush your brain. And by the way, I have 6 grandchildren, so I'm very good at shushing. And that sound, believe it or not, in and of itself, that shh, that sound is very calming. I urge every one of you, not while you're within sight of anyone else because they'll think you're crazy, but find a closet, find some place and just close your eyes and shh. You will be amazed at how that sound will calm your brain. The next thing I want you to do is set this up and do this at a desk or a table and a chair. No laying on the couch in your Snuggie, you know, watching an episode of Hoarders or say yes to the dress while you try to do this. None of that. You have to signal to your brain that this is important stuff and you have to get it ready to work. And then the last thing that I want you to do in this process, at least until it's become familiar to you, is find a way to record this, whether it's a laptop, whether it's a pen and paper. I recommend recording it so that you can track your decision making as well as the process and the action steps, and then the results of those action steps, so that you can see the progress and the process of where you started and as you move through where you are. It helps you to look at these issues and problems systematically. Now, if you downloaded the form to work the process and you're in the middle of dealing with something, get your forms out now and we'll move on through this. And as we go through this, I'm going to try to give you an abbreviated version of how I worked this process during my son's addiction issues. It's going to be abbreviated. It's going to be very concise, but it'll give you some kind of an idea of how it worked. The idea here for me is to keep it simple for you, because when we're in crisis, that's what we want to do. We want to keep things simple. Okay, so now that we kind of have our head set and our physical space set, here's the framework. And here's where you're going to set, this is where your timer starts. You're going to set your timer for the first 2 minutes. I know I told you to put your phone away, use an actual watch, use your computer, use your whatever. But the framework is the first 2 minutes. And within the framework, we have to ask ourselves some questions. And here's the very first one. It's very important. Is the problem real? Is it a real problem? Or is it something that you have either created or exacerbated in your own mind? I can ask you this question because when I was a kid, I was a drama queen. And then when I was in my 20s, I was a young 20s drama queen. And then when I had kids, I was a young mom drama queen. And so on and so on. I am a drama queen. I can build mountains out of molehills in no time at all. You've got a molehill, I can build it into a mountain if you want. So the question becomes, is this a real problem? The second thing you have to do is set a boundary around the problem. And by that I mean, figure out what the root of the problem is, not the offshoots of the problem, what the root of the problem is. For example, when we noticed money missing and we realized that my son had taken it, that was not the root of the problem. The root of the problem was his addiction. The symptom of the problem was him taking money. There was another instance where a friend of mine and I went out to dinner not too long ago, obviously long before this all started. And before she left the house, her adult children asked her if she would make dinner for them because they didn't want to make it themselves. I don't know if they didn't know how, they didn't want to, but they asked her to make dinner for them. So she did. She gave in, she made dinner for them. Then she went out to dinner with me. We had a great time. And I heard from her after she got home. When she got back to the house, the dinner dishes were all still in the sink. No one had cleaned up the kitchen. So the question here is, what's the root problem? Is the root problem that the dishes were in the sink? What's the root problem? No, the root problem is that she set herself up to be the maid in her house, and that's the issue that needs to be addressed. So you need to figure out what the root problem of this is. The next thing you need to do is focus. You're focusing on that one thing, one issue, and you release yourself from the coulda, shoulda, wouldas. Whatever you did before is not important. You are focusing on how to move forward from where you are right now. The coulda, woulda, shouldas don't matter. And then finally, and I know this may sound silly to some of you, I want you to set an intention. You have to make at the beginning of this process and at the beginning of any crisis, you have to make an intentional decision. Are you just visiting crisis or are you going to live there? You have to make the decision that whatever these circumstances are, they are not going to define you for the rest of your life. You have to set your intention for moving forward. I will tell you that intention manifests reality. And I can tell you a funny story how I know this. Again, a while ago, my husband and I went to see a show at a theater. It was actually Sinbad. If you've never seen him, he's really funny, very clean, great show. But we went to the theater to see Sinbad. And as all of you who have gone to the theater know, the seats are made for trolls. They're little itty bitty tiny narrow seats that you have to squeeze and squish yourself into, highly uncomfortable, only made for the purpose of squishing as many people in there as possible. So my husband and I were in the middle of this row of people, and it was uncomfortable enough as it was, but the seat next to me was empty. There was nobody sitting there. I was so excited because I thought, oh, this is great. I'll have a little room to spread out, a little bit of elbow room. And then, of course, just as soon as I thought that, because heaven forbid I think anything positive for any length of time, I thought, oh, who am I kidding? Any second now, some gigantic human is going to squeeze themselves down the aisle and sit down right next to me. And guess what? That is exactly what happened. No fault of the person. What just happened to be a big human who squished himself into the seat right next to me. And it was almost like God was manifesting, hitting me on the head and saying, you wanted to manifest this? Here it is. Intention is important. Make the intentional decision that you are not going to let these circumstances define you. Okay, now we are going to move on to the 3 questions. The next 5 minutes. Here is the first question, and I want you all to read the slide with me and then say it out loud a second time, emphasizing the word can. The first question is, what can I do? Just say it out loud on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. What can I do? Notice I didn't say, what do I want to do? Because what we want is for the whole problem to disappear. Everybody wants that. Nobody wants the problem to be there in the first place. However, what we can do and what we want to do are often 2 different things. So what can we do in the next 15 minutes? What is that decision that we can make? And you're going to have to consider some options here. So what is possible? What is possible for you to do, to accomplish? What we want is rarely possible in its entirety, but what might be possible for you to institute within that? to move towards that end result of what you want. The next thing, what is within your power or control? Remember, we talked about the control freak. Not everything is in your power or control. So when you're trying to figure out what you can do about a situation, what is within your power or control here? Now, again, in dealing with my son's situation, I couldn't cure him. That was not within my power or control. So I had to take that off of the table right away and figure out what I could do that was within my control to make the situation better. So one of the things that you want to talk about here or think about for yourself is what skills or knowledge are you bringing to the table? Logic, all of this stuff, is it logic that you're bringing? Can you cut through emotion quickly and address the situation right away? Some of our attendees said a while back. Are you diplomatic? Are you a negotiator? What is the problem and what can you bring to it in your skill set? Now, for me, with David, when he overdosed, I knew I was way out of my element, but I also knew that I was good at school. I was a good researcher. So that was where I started with him. That was what I could do to the situation. I could be a researcher and figure out what my options were. What kind of resources are you bringing to this? Is this something that requires money? Is this something that requires experience that maybe you have or someone else that you know has? What can you bring in terms of resources? What's the time frame for a solution? And then who is there in your tribe that can help you? We all have a village, and our villages, there are different pockets in our villages. Take a look at the people in your villages and all the different pockets of your village that you have and see if there's somebody in there who either has a shared experience with you or someone that has a knowledge base that you don't have. These are all the things that are going to be on the basis of answering the question of what you can do. And I just want you to make a running list of whatever comes to your mind that fits within those categories of what you can do. That's going to be your first list. That's question number 1. Should take you 5 minutes.
Mary Fran, just going to do a time check here. We're at 7:42.
Okay, so we're going to move on. Beware the land of magical thinking. Do you get stuck in the land of magical thinking when you're trying to think about what you can do? So what else do you think that might factor in? Anybody else want to put anything in there that you think might factor in that you could do in any situation aside from, like I said, whatever your skill set might be? Things that are going to help you to get where you want to be that do not require magic. Something, say perhaps it could be, like I said, it could be if you're a logical person, do you have a perspective on things that you can bring that might be different from someone else? So we're going to move on from this just so that we can keep moving. So again, for me, do we have any answers?
Yeah, we have one instinct from past experiences. So kind of.
That's perfect. I'm so glad that whoever that was brought that up. Thank you, because instinct and what you feel in your gut should never, ever be ignored. You can always bring your instinctive feelings about whether something is right or wrong to that, and you should listen to that. So thank you for that. That's a perfect answer. Okay, we're going to move on to the next 5 minutes. So if you're keeping track, we're up to 12 minutes now. And the question is, what should I do? What should I do? And that's going to be mitigated by, again, another few questions. Is this your problem? Is it your problem? Not someone else's problem, not one of your children's problems. Is this a problem of yours? Is this problem affecting you? Does it affect you in a certain way, or are you just annoyed by it? There's a big difference. Are you affected or are you annoyed? Because if you're annoyed, there's a good chance that you can shelve it and not spend any of your precious time trying to figure out what you need to do about this. If you're not affected and you're just annoyed, put it aside. It's not something that you need to deal with. Is this your business? Is this something you need to be putting your business, you're putting your nose into? I saw a sign, another one of my signs. I found your nose. It was in my business again. Do you need to be inserting yourself into this situation, or are you just falling back on your control freak tendencies? And lastly, is it better for you to act or not to act? Just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do something. My poor daughter, I call her out all the time on this. I have 2 daughters. I won't name her, but I call her out all the time on this, and she's married, has a wonderful husband now, but she has dated fellas in the past who were, let's just say, not our favorites. And just because I can tell her that she could do a lot better doesn't mean I should. So you really have to temper this with what is going to be good, not just for you and what you want, but what should you do that's going to help the other person if in fact this problem is something that you have to get involved in that may not be yours. There are any number of reasons not to act, among them being that it's none of your business, and also that your idea of helping may not be what other people need or want. So what should your level of involvement be? Once you ask the question, what should I do? And you answer it based on that, here's your last question. Well, okay, first of all, what should you do? Do you have a superhero cape in your closet? Does anybody remember Mighty Mouse? Here he comes to save the day, when Mighty Mouse would put the superhero cape on and solve everybody's problems. The superhero cape in your closet. Do you put others' needs or responsibilities above your own because you should? And this is particularly true of people who have kids who are either adults or moving into adulthood and should be handling their own stuff. Think about how far you need to be involved. How can shoulding yourself keep both you and others from succeeding? Anybody want to weigh in on that? Have you found yourself in the past trying to solve other people's problems because you think you can help them?
Mary Fran, I've got a 22-year-old living at home right now. And if I step in too often, I'm not letting him learn from his own, not even mistakes, choices and the consequences.
Yes. And it's so easy to do that. And I mean, let's be clear here. We're not pointing the blame finger at anybody because all of this starts from the best of intentions. However, if we're going to raise well-functioning, independent young adults, there are things that they should be doing on their own, like making their own dentist appointments or, putting their own gas in the car or whatever that happens to be. And it's easy enough to start small like that so that you can gradually turn the bigger things over to them. But before you jump in, really ask yourself, is this something that I should be doing or should they?
We have 2 good comments here from Jean. You end up clipping their wings and they get stronger or learn. And from Trey, it's more fun to solve other people's problems than
Oh, Trey, you hit right on one of the things that we do. We solve other people's problems so we don't have to look at our own. That is huge. And I'm so glad you brought that up because it's so easy to be somebody else's savior so that you don't have to manage your own stuff. It takes the focus off your stuff and then somebody says, oh, thank you, you're so wonderful, that's so great. Stop doing that. Handle your own stuff and then you can go save the world. We have to learn how to handle our own stuff. Thank you, Trey. I appreciate that comment. Okay, so the third thing and the last 3 minutes, what am I going to do?
I'm going to interrupt Mary Fran because we do have a good comment from Rita. She said sometimes you can be more objective with other people's problems.
You absolutely can, and that's very true. And that goes back to trying to take some of the emotion out of what we are experiencing in a crisis. And here's the thing, if you are finding it hard to do that, find a friend or a family member or somebody who is a couple degrees removed from the level of emotion that you're experiencing, someone who still cares about you, but who is not going to absorb the pain of what it is you're going through and experiencing. And let that person be a sounding board. We talked about using your tribe. Let that person enter into the equation just insofar as to help you clear and the muddied waters away, so that you can approach it with a little bit more of a logical and a less emotional perspective. So thank you for that. That's a great comment. Okay, so what am I going to do? This is the decision that you arrive at based on the answers to your two previous questions, your list of what you can do and then what you should do on the basis of what your options are. So you're going to pick, this is where you pick your action step. This is where you're going to pick that step that you're going to implement. However, once again, it's not always easy just to look at those things and say, well, this is what I'm going to do, because there are a couple of other factors that might enter into this. And I'm going to make the case for 3 possibilities here. The first one is making the case for courage. Do you need to be brave? Do you need to just walk through the fire for what this is and try to get through the other side? And as Winston Churchill said, if you are in the fire, if you find yourself in hell, keep on going. You don't stop in the middle of it. Again, when I was in this situation for David, one of the things that I should do, the basic precept there was, should I act or shouldn't I? Well, yes, I should act, because otherwise my son could quite literally could die. So in that case, I needed to grab onto courage. I needed to go further into the fire so that I could help him to get out the other side. Courage is not easy. It requires a leap of faith, but sometimes that's the only way to get through. So make that your goal. If you're in the middle of hell, keep on going. Don't rest there. Find the courage and move forward. The next option is nothing. Maybe you don't need to do anything about this situation. Maybe it's something that will unknot itself or evolve on its own. Very often, particularly if we feel like we got a gut punch and it's an emotional thing, we feel like we just want to get it solved so the emotion will go away and we don't have to deal with it anymore. That's not always necessary. Sometimes we just need to let things unknot themselves. My husband's mother a number of years ago fell and had a traumatic brain injury, and we have done our best up to this point to put services in place for her. Is that situation going to get any better? The odds are no. So at this point in the game, instead of making ourselves crazy looking for better, we're just trying to keep the house of cards up. We're doing nothing but trying to maintain. And sometimes that's the best thing that you can do. Not torture yourself to find a better solution, because there may not be one. And the last thing that you might need to do is consider retreat, which is not the same as defeat. They rhyme, but they're not the same thing. Sometimes you need to take a step back and reassess where you are. Figure out what the whole process is. Figure out what exactly is happening, particularly if you've taken the 15 minutes to look at the situation more logically and broken down into pieces more so than you have before. You can retreat. You can take a step back, reassess, rebuild, or if you need it, just go have a spa day. Sometimes completely stepping away from something is the best way to free your brain to come up with another solution. So once you've considered courage, nothing, or retreat, then you make your choice for what you're going to do. And what's next? You implement your action step, and this is so important. You do not be married to an outcome. Anytime we implement a change or we introduce something to a situation, either something's going to happen to change it or nothing's going to happen. You have to wait and see which one of those two takes effect. If something happens, then you have new information. Then you have new circumstances. Then you can go back to your previous lists of what you can do and what you should do. You look them over and you see if maybe you can implement another one of those actions to further move things along, or if you're going to have to start over again if the situation's changed that dramatically. But instead of torturing yourself with the what ifs after you implement that action step, you have to let it go for a while, because you have no control over the outcome. What you control is what you did, that action step that you implemented. And now you have to take a step back and let whatever other circumstances, other people who are weighing in, or other parts of the situation may be affected by what you did and whether or not it's going to change. Do not be married to outcomes. We wait. Something happens or nothing happens. New information changes the equation. And if you have to, you work the 15-minute master again. Here's the system outline in its entirety. You clear your physical and mental space. You live in a 15-minute segment of time. You create the framework, which is the first 2 minutes. Is it real? Set up boundaries and find the root of the problem. Focus on your intention, which you're going to set first by deciding that you are just visiting a place of crisis. You're not going to live there. The next 5 minutes, you ask yourself what you can do, what you can reasonably accomplish given your skills, your resources, your tribe, and your time. What should I do is the next 5 minutes, based on how much involvement you should have, whether it's your business, whether it's affecting you or annoying you, whether it's your turn to get your messy help all over somebody. That's my favorite writer, Anne Lamott. She says, don't get your messy help all over everybody. The last 3 minutes is where you decide what you're going to do based on either courage, doing nothing, or retreating and taking a step back. Then you implement your action step. You see what happens without being married to outcomes, and then you work the system again until the issue is resolved. Repeat as necessary. Wash, rinse, repeat as necessary. Okay, that's the 15-minute master, my friends. Does anybody have any further thoughts or comments? And did this turn out to be a system that you think you can implement in your life to help you manage crisis in both manageable chunks and with less emotional baggage? As I said, for me, this started out during David's crisis, and it was a mental thing until I realized it could be an actual system. And the step that I implemented for David at the end of this, again, was getting him to go into rehab, which of course led to a whole other series of issues, and we used the 15-minute master to work through it again. So I'm interested to hear if this is something that you folks think would be workable for you. Any feedback?
Yeah, this is really helpful. It's very specific and particularly appropriate given the challenges we're all facing now.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, really and truly, we have this quarantine yawning before us. And I think we're all confused and concerned about what's happening next. But instead of thinking and projecting too far ahead, break your day down into those 15-minute chunks. And it doesn't have to be constantly thoughtful. It can just be an intention. I'm just going to get through the next 15 minutes. And before you know it, you will have progressed through the day. And when you do have time to make a bigger plan, that's when you sit down with that whole process and you figure out, okay, what do I want to start? And how can I move forward and make this next thing that I want to do, a next action step, how can I make this appropriate and effective for helping me solve problems?
We do have one question here.
Yes.
Do you sometimes not get to the root until later?
Oh, of course. Because it's very hard sometimes to figure out what the root is, especially if it's grown a lot of legs and tendrils. You know, we tend to react to the symptoms because those are the things that are needling us and poking us. Those are the things that are the sort of the end game. So you have to kind of work backwards sometimes. And each time you see a symptom, it's helpful to say to yourself, where did this come from? And to kind of trace it back to its origin. And that's when you can help find yourself the root of the problems.
All right. So
Okay.
getting
Well,
a
I'm
number of
going to
thank yous.
15 minutes, 3 questions, 1 action step to make things better. And please feel free to connect with me. This has been a great opportunity to connect with the LaSalle community. And Deborah, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you, Mary Fran. It's wonderful to find in our alumni network out there somebody who's, has offer. You've lived it, and just wonderful. You want to share what you learned through your difficult period of time with your son. You want to share that with others who are going through their own challenges.
Yeah, and it's very important to do that. And I should also close this story by saying that my son has been sober for 8 years now. He is a married father of 3. In fact, his 5-year wedding anniversary is in a couple of days, and he actually works in the recovery field. So anyone out there also who is struggling or having issues or problems, either reach out to me or reach out to my son, Dave Bontempo, and he can offer you some help and support.